really great panel of individuals here, creators, artists. Well, I'm a huge fan of all these people, so I'm going to let them introduce themselves rather than read off their bios and credits. And so, Gene, why don't you just get started and tell us who you are and why are you here?
Sure.
Justify yourself.
My name is Gene Yang. I am a cartoonist and I'm also a high school teacher. I'm here because I'm a cartoonist, not because I'm a high school teacher. But I've done comics and graphic novels for about 10 years now. My most successful book is called American Born Chinese, which was released in 2006. And then my most recent book will be released in this June. And it's a joint project with Tin Pham, who's another Bay Area Asian American cartoonist. It's called Level Up, and it's about a video game addict who has to go to med school.
Gene's far too modest because his American Born Chinese is actually insanely successful. I mean, it won like a National Book Award and an Eisner and many other things. It's amazing. It's literally one of the greatest depictions of the Asian, quote-unquote, Asian American experience I've ever seen in any form. I always go on and on about it just because it really is amazing. Check it out. Anyway, my name is Craig Pock. I'm a filmmaker and comic book writer. I love this festival too. They've shown like a bazillion things that I've done over the years and just been incredibly supportive. I'm probably best known in the film world for a feature film called Robot Stories, and which you can actually watch on Netflix now. Watch it instantly kind of thing. In the comics world, I have mostly written for Marvel. I'm currently writing Incredible Hulk for Marvel, as well as a Silver Surfer miniseries, and co-writing a Hercules book with Fred Van Lente, and also co-writing a new Alpha Flight book that's coming up with Fred Van Lente. So tell your retailers that you want those books, and I'll keep writing them.
Hi, my name is Hellen Jo, and I'm a Bay Area based, well, I live in San Francisco, and I am a small press cartoonist. That means I have a publisher that's one guy in Portland, and he's awesome. And I do the comic Gin and Jam. It's a coming of age serial comic about two Asian American girls in San Jose hacking it out in high school, dealing with bullshit. I've been doing comics. I've been doing mostly zines, like self-published comics, for about 9 or 10 years. And I've also worked for the Asian American Film Festival as a box office cashier. I might have sold you tickets in the past.
My name is Alex Rivera. I'm a filmmaker, and occasionally a digital media artist. I'm here at the festival, obviously on this panel. I'm also on the documentary jury, even though the last film that I did was a fiction film, a science fiction film called Sleep Dealer. I don't know, basically I think I'm on this panel because, well, I'm attached to direct the film version of A Contract with God, which was classic Will Eisner comic, along with 3 other directors right now. I'm one of 3. The other is Z Chun, who I think's work has been at this festival before, and Barry Jenkins, who's a Bay Area-based filmmaker who made a film called Medicine for Melancholy. But so the 3 of us are directing Contract with God, each of us taking on one story. So I have that connection to the comic world in a sort of future project. But I think more fundamentally, maybe what I have to offer here is that in all of my work over the past 15 years, I've been thinking about ways in which genre, fantasy, icons of science fiction, images like the robot, can be used to illuminate the immigrant experience. In my case, I've been focused on sort of Latino universe, but I think maybe there's something I can offer, we can dialogue about just in ways in which that the sort of tropes and images of science fiction are very, very applicable to the experience of being uprooted, the experience of living in divided communities, the experience of being sort of locked out of legal status or different realities that that immigrant communities face in the U.S. that I think resonate, right up against themes that are often discussed in the universe of fantasy and science fiction. So that synapse between genre and fantasy and the very concrete reality that our communities live in has been a place that I've been trying to work in.
Maybe you guys could briefly, without giving like a life story, talk about your entry into your careers and how you got started and stuff like that.
I'm from San Jose. I grew up there all through high school, and then I moved to Berkeley to go to college. And I was a German major for like 3.5 years. Not really 3.5 years, like 2 years. And I was actually, when I was in Berkeley, I discovered mini comics, and it was actually because of there's an Asian American art festival in the city called Aperture. I don't know if you know, but it's run by the King Street Workshop. And the very first one I ever went to, that's where I sold my first mini comic. And like everyone in Berkeley was making them, and that's where I met Gene. And I also met Tim Pham, and I met Derek Kim, and I met Jason Shiga, and like they were all doing self-published mini comics, which I had never seen before. And zines are kind of amazing because everything's under your control. You make them yourself, and you staple them yourself. But that also means that only like 10 people will see them, and 2 of those people will be your parents. So I kept doing comics throughout Berkeley, and then I ended up dropping out because I'm not a good student. And I did a bunch of like some bigger self-published work, and I eventually kind of hooked up with this publisher, Sparkplug Books in Portland, and they've been publishing the comic I'm working on now. My parents, I'm back in school, I go to art school, so they're okay with that. They're like, oh, you're gonna get a degree, it's great. The comics part, they're just like, this is a weird hobby you're doing. Why do you hang out with weird people in different countries? And it doesn't make any sense. But like, they kind of support it just out of love, if not understanding.
I went to NYU Film School, and after having done a number of different things, I studied political science in college and thought I was going to go back home to Texas and work in Texas politics. Ended up going to England on a scholarship and studied history, but then got involved in the filmmaking group, which then took me to NYU, and all the lights went on. I mean, filmmaking was where I thought all my energies and talents belonged, and it is one of those places. But after coming out of film school, making a ton of short films, and making robot stories, my agent found out that Marvel was looking for writers, and she asked if I would be interested in being considered, and I was like, of course, because I'd grown up reading comics. I actually was drawing comics long before I ever thought about doing film. As a kid, I actually, not too long ago, I was looking through stuff in storage and found this story I'd written about a dragon that went electric that I had drawn, and my mom had written the captions for and everything. And also, I remember, I remember drawing with my dad. My doctor dad was had this as a kid. I think he was a big comics fan. He has that horror story of coming back from college and my grandma had thrown out all of his original Classics Illustrated comics. If only he had them now, they'd be worth tens. But no, they actually would be worth a lot. But anyway, my dad and I bonded both over drawing, but also over movies and stuff. So, so I kind of came back to something I loved as a kid in a serendipitous way, and it all made sense. It's weird because I spend a huge part of my day, every day, obsessing in tiny detail, working with all of my adult brain on things that I was totally obsessed with as a 10-year-old, so, which I guess is not a bad life to have. Yeah, I mean, on the parent front, I think my folks have always been just really supportive, of whatever us kids wanted to do. I think when I was in, I don't think they really thought too much about it. I mean, I announced I wanted to be a writer when I was like 10 years old. They're like, okay, whatever. Probably thinking I'd end up in law school or something. But I think maybe the tables turned and they realized I was kind of serious about it when I won second place in this scholastic short story writing competition when I was a junior in high school. And I think they were like, maybe there's something to this. But they were always just really supportive of it. I didn't have those sad tales of woe.
The Tiger Brother story?
No. I got into comics very similar to the way Helen did. I grew up reading comics. I read a lot of Marvel. Hulk was one of my favorites, actually. And
he's Korean.
Hulk? I could believe it. Anyways, and then after I graduated from college, I knew that I had to publish at least one issue of a comic, or I would die an unhappy man. So the internet was getting started at the time. I went online and I did all this research. I found out about mini comics. I found out about self-publishing comics. And I just started doing it. So that's one of my favorite things about the comic book medium, is that the line that divides a reader from a creator is really, really thin and really permeable. All you really need is, a pen and some paper and maybe an ignorance of your own limitations, and you can get something out there. My parents, my mom actually has always had an interest in art, so she's always been pretty supportive. My dad is less so, because he is more practically minded. When I went to college, I went to Berkeley, like Helen, and he told me, you just major in something practical, doctor, lawyer, engineer, and I'll leave you alone. You can do whatever you want afterwards, and I'll leave you alone. So I did. I majored in computer science, because I'm a little bit of a computer nerd. And afterwards, I started working as a programmer, and lo and behold, he didn't say a thing. But then, after 2 years of programming, I just felt like that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I started teaching high school, and I started drawing at around the same time. So he didn't say anything, like he promised. But every few months, I would get this little envelope in the mail, and I'd open it up, and there would be all these little newspaper clippings comparing like doctor salaries to teacher salaries. There'd be like want ads from Silicon Valley companies and all this kind of stuff, right? And every few months, I would get that, until actually, after American Born Chinese was published, they got nominated for the National Book Award, and this newspaper called the World Journal, which is this Chinese language newspaper for overseas Chinese people, did a write-up about me. And after my dad read that, he actually laminated the article, and I stopped getting those envelopes in my mailbox. I gotta tell you though, I have 3 kids now, and I am starting to turn into my dad. My son, who's 7 now, when he was really little, he wanted to be a garbage man. I was like, yeah, that's cool, that's fine. And then he started getting into drawing, and now he says he wants to be an artist. And I just think to myself, how are you going to feed yourself? A couple of years ago, I went to China, and in China they have these amazing artists working on all these tourist traps. There are these guys who can take like a glass sphere, and they can paint on the inside of the sphere. They can paint like fish and women dancing and like cityscapes on the inside of the sphere. That's amazing, I don't know anybody who could do that in the States. And they're sitting there and they're basically living hand to mouth despite their artistic ability. So I really think that my dad had that kind of a person in mind when he was freaking out about me doing something practical, right? And now that those same thoughts have sort of migrated into my brain, and now I'm thinking that about my kid.
Yeah, but it'd be really cool if you could draw a fish on the inside of the sphere.
It'd be amazing if there not any stars to that.
For me, I guess I never got into comics. I'm still not particularly into comics, but I think that for the 15 years that I've been making work, I've had a kind of there's been a permeable membrane between my life as a filmmaker and a group of friends and kind of inspirations who are comic makers. And I think it's probably worth saying, since we're at a film festival, and at least for me, there's really no medium that's more twinned with cinema than comics. I mean, it's very, very clear, because they're both, narrative mediums, and they're mediums in which you're frequently telling stories through pictures. So the two mediums are there's a reason that there's so many movies that come from comic books, and now that I've been navigating a little bit the film industry, I've actually had people tell me, oh, if you have the script, you might want to get it made into a comic book before it gets made into a movie, because, when people can see it in the comic form, then they can really envision the movie. And so the two mediums are twins. And so early on, like one experience I had was when I made my first film and started to travel to film festivals, I met a comic artist named Lalo Alcaraz, who does a cartoon called La Cucaracha, He came out of the Bay Area here from Berkeley, and he did a zine in the mid-90s called Pocho Magazine, which he called it like Mad Magazine for Mad Mexicans. And, you know, and so it was very, very funny, very abrasive, political humor. And, but it was in zine form, and it was back in the day when to get an image or a word out, it was on a Xerox machine and stapling it. And so I became the New York distributor of Pocho Magazine, and I also started to work with him, taking some of the comics and animating them. So I would scan them and put them in After Effects, and then we'd add voices to them, and we made a series of shorts that we released to film festivals and on the internet.